once you get all that done, like I said, you can go ahead and cut that hole out. From here, what the process is to go ahead and do all your riveting on your air box. Put a couple clecos in here, show you what it looks like. Now remember, when you're squeezing rivets into this fiberglass, you know, be a little gentle. You don't want to be busting your fiberglass up. This will all get primed. I mean, it's still just aluminum, so I'll prime it all. And that's what your air box will look like when it's all finished. And it'll, you know, there's your wide open, and there's your carb heat position. This will be fitted back on to the aircraft. And then you want to go ahead and permanently attach your air scoop to your cowling. Now we'll show you what this looks like back on the airplane. With your carb air box placed back onto the carburetor, here's what it'll look like. Now, the reason for the length, according to the instructions, that you'll need to cut it, and the length will depend on several things. First, it'll depend on the carburetor, where it is on the engine, forward sump, rear sump, center sump, and the type of engine that you've got. But the reason for the length is so that when the cowling drops down, your carb air box can clear the scoop. Okay, if you look at the scoop, you've got a lot of area in here, so you don't want it sitting right up in here. You'll never get your cowling off. And your cowling will go right up like this. Now, the procedure we'll follow next is we'll finish attaching the air scoop onto our cowling with some fiberglass. The next thing we're going to do is, remember that construction foam, we're going to take that foam block and we're going to shove it right into the scoop here, okay, all the way up against here, and we're going to shove it in around this hole. So you got to cut it so it fits in there real tight. You want to use a little Bondo or some fiberglass so it holds in there. Now what we're going to do with that block is then tunnel out. We're going to tunnel through the block to create a ram tunnel between the front of this and the front of this. So we're gonna create this tunnel through that block of foam, and then we're gonna fiberglass that in. We're gonna fiberglass this tunnel in, fairing it into the front of our scoop real nice, and creating this tunnel that'll come within about a quarter of an inch of our carb air box. And we'll do this with fiberglass. Once we've done that, we'll scoop all the rest of the foam out. We've got this nice fiberglass tunnel now that'll meet up with this. That's where our rubber comes in. Our rubber will then go around like this, okay, and that'll act as a gasket between this fiberglass tunnel that we've created and our carb air box. So that'll give us a nice ram effect all the way back in there. So now you got an idea of the procedure that we're going to be doing here shortly. And this is going to be a little time consuming, but a little time and patience and you can get a nice fit on your carb air box and a nice ram air effect. So we're going to do that now, and we'll show you as we go along what we're doing. In preparation for fiberglass and our scoop in and putting our hinges on, there's something we did, and this was per the instructions. We took all of our hinges and drilled extra holes in them, and you can see the bigger holes, and we opted to drill 3/16. I think the directions say somewhere around a quarter of an inch, but actually drilled them between all the holes that rivets will go in. This is just to give extra adhesion to the fiberglass. Now what we'll do is under all of our hinges we'll place a small piece of fiberglass about a ½ inch and actually glue the hinges on to the fiberglass cowling, as well as putting the rivets in, the AN rivets. We also have cut some fiberglass in bigger pieces, and these are 6 to 8 inches wide and as long as we need them. and that's going to be used for fiberglassing the scoop into the cowling. Now, looking at the cowling, we've made our cutout. We've gone ahead and pop riveted our scoop on once we were satisfied it was in the right place. And now we're just going to take the fiberglass and fiberglass it in like this. Now, from talking with some other builders, we found that the epoxy fiberglass seems to work better than the polyester, because the epoxy will tend to move a little bit more with the cowling, where the polyester tends to get a little brittler and tends to crack sometimes. So we're going to put 2 coats of fiberglass cloth all the way around and fiberglass the scoop right on into the cowling. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and fiberglass the hinges on, putting the cloth of fiberglass between the hinge and the cowling, and then rivet it together. So we're just going to set this down like this, mix our fiberglass up, and go ahead and fiberglass it in. We're just dabbing the fiberglass in just like we did when we did the canopy. You'll find also that the epoxy fiberglass gives you much more time to work with it than the polyester. Where the polyester you've got maybe 15-20 minutes, the epoxy you've got several hours to work with, and in this case you do need that much time. Also, if you're doing this in a cool place, you're going to find that either of the fiberglass will not harden quickly, so you're going to want to put a heater on this after you get it all in or something to keep it around the 70-80 degree mark that the manufacturer recommends. Now we're going to dab just a little bit down in here, only because this is fairly dry. Now, we've sanded this all down, just roughed it up a little bit to help the fiberglass stick. And if you find it's a little dry or something, you can go ahead and wet it a little bit. Now, where your pop rivets are, you may find that if you just take some scissors and cut the material so the pop rivet can go down in there, it'll alleviate the little air pocket that gets formed around the pop rivet itself. And you just want to work all the air bubbles out. And if you need a little extra resin, just put that on. Okay, so we're going to want to do this all the way around the scoop, 2 coats. 2 coats will be fine, because then once this is hardened, we're going to flip it over and do the same thing on the outside to fair the outside of it in, another 2 coats, and then we'll micro balloon it and sand it all out real nice. So from here we're going to go ahead and finish this up. Once the inside of the scoop has been fiberglassed to the cowling, next thing we want to do is go ahead and fiberglass our hinges in. Now, like I said, the hinges have had the holes drilled. They've all been drilled and clecoed on. The outside of the cowling has been countersunk. We're going to be using AN 426 3-5s. The book calls for 3-4s, and I found them to be a little short. First thing we want to do is take our little pieces of cloth and apply some resin to them, cut them to length to fit in there, apply some resin to them, put them on our hinge, and then cleco our hinge back on before we do our riveting. This is all just to help glue this hinge onto the fiberglass. So we're going to take a quick measurement here. Put a little fiberglass on this. Now, I want to put just a little resin because this is dry. Go ahead and wet that a little bit. And cleco it back on. Now sandwiching the fiberglass between the aluminum. Okay, don't need any runs. Now we need to go ahead and get our rivets. We've taken our rivets and put in a little cup. One, so we don't knock a whole bunch of them over at once, and also you don't want to get a whole bunch of your rivets messy. Because of the cloth in there, you may have to take a drill bit to open your hole up. And then we just go ahead and hand squeeze. Set our squeezer up here. And we just hand squeeze our rivet on. Alright. And it'll give you a nice flush fit on the back side. So we're going to go ahead and do all of our hinges this way while we're playing with fiberglass. We'll just go ahead and do them all. Once we do all the hinges on the lower part of the cowling, we're going to want to put the cowling back on the airplane. Now the reason for that is the scoop. You'll find that when you go to put the cowling back on, you'll rock that scoop in the bottom part of the cowling around a little bit. And that's fine. You want to go ahead and do that and put it on the airplane, so as this fiberglass cures, it's going to cure in just the shape you want. Where if you leave it off the airplane, you do have a possibility of it curing crooked. So we're going to go ahead and do all our hinges and then put the cowling back on the airplane to cure. Once we've got all the hinges attached to the lower part of the cowling, like I said, we put the lower part of the cowling back on. We also put our hinge pins in. Now we're not going to put the top part of the cowling on right now, but we've put these hinge pins in just in case some fiberglass got into the holes. The pins will keep it from clogging, and then later we can pull the pins out and clean the pins up a little bit. But just little safety precautions. The side pins have been put in and the bottom pins have been put in. So the cowling's on there tight and it's holding the shape we want that scoop assembly to cure in. Now we've gone over here to the upper part of the cowling, and we're going to put the side pins in, or the side hinges on, and the back hinges on, just like we did on the lower part. And they'll be finished all except for the two little short pins that go right in here, right around where the spinner plate is, and we haven't gotten to those yet. But we want to go ahead and rivet and epoxy these on now. Once we've got all the hinges on and we've got the inside of the cowling scoop connection done, as you can see here, all fiberglassed in real nice. Next is the outside connection. Now, along the edge here, we've sanded it and tried to feather the scoop down to the cowling as much as we can. From here, we're just going to use a 2-inch fiberglass tape, and we're just going to fiberglass that in like that. We've gone ahead and sanded both the cowling and the scoop, and we're just going to lay 2 layers all the way around. Let that cure, and we may even, when it's just about cured up, go ahead and put the micro balloon to feather it out real nice and sand it off, and you'll never notice the difference. So from here, we're going to go ahead and lay all this up. Once the cloth has started to cure, we went ahead and put some micro balloon on. While it was still a little gummy, the micro balloon will stick a little better. And you can see it's just sort of a rough coating, and just like with any of the other fiberglass work with micro balloon, it'll be a process of sanding and filling until we're done, and then the bottom part of the cowling is done. And after a couple evenings of sanding and filling with the micro balloon, and we made the micro balloon up just like we've always done, just the epoxy or the polyester resin, and mixed the micro balloon up until it's a paste the way we want it, and some sanding, we've got the cowling down real good shape. Over top of the micro balloon, what we've done is just apply a little of the just pure epoxy resin with the hardener, and it's hardened now, and this will wet sand off. If you don't, the micro balloon sometimes is hard to fill with the paint, so this will just get all wet sanded off, and it'll be a real nice cowling for us. Next, we started working on the nose gear. Primarily, we've got the nose wheel fairing, and then we've got a fairing on the landing gear itself, and that sort of corresponds with the bottom part of the cowling, so it's all has to fit together. To do the nose wheel fairing, it's nothing special. The plans are pretty straightforward. We've done some of it here, but basically the procedure is on the wheel fairing itself, there's a little dimple, and that dimple is supposed to correspond with the center of your axle. Now, I found that dimple may be just a tad too far forward, so it may pay to just come aft a little bit, maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. You can get a little better fit. But if you find that you've put this too far forward, you can always fill it in with fiberglass and start over again. Anyway, then you drill this out to a 3/16 inch hole, and you can either use your bolt or you can use a piece of dowel rod. And what you do is you take your 6/16C, now the C's been attached already onto the bolt, but this was a 6/16C, and I put that on the inside and ran my dowel rod through, and that positioned the center of the 6/16C with that hole. And it's just like they have in the plans. And then I only drilled 2 holes through the 6/16C and into the fiberglass right now, and that's in case I decide that's not where I want and I want to move it. I don't have any more holes to fill than necessary. Once those holes were drilled, I pulled my dowel out, took my 6/16Cs out, and I also marked them which side they went on so I didn't get them confused. Opened this hole up with a unibit so it was big enough to get the bolt through. Now, if you're going to use a tow bar, you're probably going to have to open this hole up to 3/4 of an inch or better to get your tow bar on, because your tow bar will attach right onto this bolt here. From there, you go ahead and slide the bottom or the back part of your wheel fairing on. And you may have to trim a little bit along the bottom edge and along the back edge to get your fit. Once you've got it on, you go ahead and cleco your 6/16Cs in place. The next thing is to get your position of the back of the wheel fairing. And according to the instructions, they say about 3.5 inches. I wouldn't make anything permanent at this point. I'd go ahead and attach the front part of the fairing on, because what will happen, the front part of the fairing actually hits up in here if you lift this up too high or if you've got it down too low. So it all has to fit together. So the next thing you need to do on the front part is actually cut a groove that'll go through your landing gear, will go through, and then an area to allow this thing to pivot. Now, to do all this, you're going to have to jack the plane up a little bit, either put a jack under it or hoist it from the engine mount to lift it up so that the nose wheel can pivot. So that's the basic procedure, and let me put it all together here and we'll show you what it looks like. This is what it looks like when it's all together. Now, we've only got our 2 clecos and our 6/16C. We've also drilled the 6/16D. But what we did before that, we've jacked the plane up so that the nose wheel can turn, and we took it in its full range of motion to make sure that the hole was big enough to allow so it didn't rub our landing gear. Then we did a little testing to make sure it fit nice, one way or the other. Then we lowered it back down, and we actually lowered it down and got it right in the position that we wanted it, and slid a block of wood under it so it stayed there. Then we took the nose part of the wheel fairing off, and we could measure and see where our 6/16D was, and we went ahead and just drilled 2 holes in each one of those. Now we'll take this all apart, and we'll attach our 6/16D and our 6/16C back on to the wheel fairing, drill our other holes, and go ahead and countersink and rivet them on. We'll also open this hole up enough to get our tow bar on here. On our 6/16D, before we rivet it on, we'll drill a hole straight through the 6/16D. There's an opening in it because we have to be able to put the hex nut that holds it on from the outside. So we've still got a hole to drill in the side here, but we'll actually do that after the 6/16D has been riveted into place. And basically the wheel fairing is done except to clean it up. Now again, on the top of this, it didn't match up. The top of the wheel fairing didn't quite match up with the nose of the wheel fairing. The top was a little lower, so when we had some micro balloon mixed up, we went ahead and put some micro balloon on here and then sanded it down so it fit perfect, made a nice contour shape. And then when that was all dry and sanded, we went ahead and put a little extra resin, and this will all get wet sanded just before we paint. We don't like to do any of our final wet sanding until just before we paint. So the next thing we want to do is our wheel fairing, or our gear fairing. I said the wheel or the gear fairing is made up of door molding, and it's just your standard door molding that you can get at the hardware store. It's about a 1/2 inch or so thick on one end, down to about an 1/8 inch thick on the other end. We took and cut it some lengths. We also cut a notch in it, and I'll see if I can break this notch off a little bit. What we did was cut about a 45-degree cut right on the end there. And what that did, when you put 2 of these together, it created a V. And with the 2 of them together, here's the V it created right there. Then we took a wood plane and sander and sanded to a point here. Remember, it's an 1/8 inch thick, so we ended up with a 1/4 of an inch thick edge here, and we planed and sanded that down until we got the shape we wanted. Now, this has to correspond with several things. First, the one end has to correspond with the wheel fairing. So it goes in just like this, and you can see it fits real nice, gives about a 1/2 inch gap under this wheel fairing. Now, the back end here has to correspond to some parts that go in the back, and you can see there's a notch right here for the parts that go in the back that will actually hold the back of the cowling. So we'll get to that, but just be aware that you may have to do some little cutting back here. So that'll go like that. Now, what we do with this, and the purpose of this is twofold. One is to fair this gear, to give it a better shape. And two is to give it just a little stiffness, just take a little bit of the bounce out. It won't make it any stronger, just to take a little of the vibration out. Now, how this will be attached, we'll actually just take some standard old automotive Bondo and put some Bondo down in here, and before the Bondo cures, we'll stick it up in there and just glue that right onto there. Now, from here, we'll take and actually wrap this now with 2-inch fiberglass cloth and epoxy resin, and we'll take 2 wraps all the way up and down. And this will be done off the airplane. We'll pull the gear out, we'll take the wheel off and everything, and after the Bondo is set up, you want to put this on with it all on here so you get it in the position you want. So once that's on, then we'll sand that down real nice and a little filler, and it'll make a nice fairing. Now, the second thing we need to do, let me get a wire tie, we'll tie this in place so you can get a reference. This is the bottom of your fairing. Now, in the cowling itself, remember there's a big notch, and that notch has to be big enough that when the bottom of the cowling comes off, it can drop down to clear your spinner. So your notch actually comes forward of this several inches. Now, to seal that off, what you do is you take some building foam, and this is a very light foam. You can get it from Aircraft Spruce, and it snaps real easy, and it shapes real fast. You can see it just works right off with your finger. And you make a little thing that looks like this. Now, where this will go is right like that. And this will get fiberglassed in, and what it does is that notch in the cowling is taken up by this, and it'll sit right there. Okay? And so now when your cowling drops down, it'll clear this and clear your landing gear. So that's the next thing you have to make. And this, again, is one of those cut and fit type of thing to get it just where you want. So let's go ahead and put the bottom part of the cowling on, and we'll show you how this will all look when it's all done. Now with the cowling put back on, you can see the relationship between everything. Here's that fairing that'll get all fiberglassed in real nice. The notch in the cowling ends right here. Okay, so without this little part of the fairing in here, you'd have a big notch right in there. And this right now is just sitting in there, but it's been shaped to match the hole in the cowling. So now when we go to take the cowling off, the cowling can drop straight down and then clear the spinner and come out. But this part will be all nice and fiberglassed in. After we've fiberglassed this in, we'll fiberglass this piece onto it and sand and fair it in so it's all one nice unit now. And this part will seal the hole that's in here. We've rounded off the front of the notch in here, and as well as rounded off this little piece of construction foam, and that'll give us a nice fairing and a nice effect all the way back and down to the wheel, and that'll what we'll do for the landing gear. So from here we're going to go ahead and finish up our nose gear fairings, and then we'll start doing the fiberglass on this, and we'll show you just how that procedure goes. On drawings 61 and 62, this is all shown. What we have to fit onto the landing gear and the engine mount before we can fiberglass this in to make sure nothing's going to interfere is first our used 620B. Now, there's a whole bunch of parts. You have the 620B that goes on like this, Then on the bottom goes your 620Cs, and this creates something that looks like this. Now what this is for is the notch of the cowling. This sits like this. The cowling itself, that notch that's in there to clear the landing gear, will fit right in there. Okay. Then underneath this goes your used 621 like this, and that sandwiches in there, and that seals that notch in your cowling. And this has some bolts in it so it can twist and come out to allow you to put your cowling on. Now, on top of that goes your 620A, which will go like this. Okay, there's two bolts go in here, and these go into your engine mount. Then there's a bolt here that goes up into your fuselage. Okay, so what this all looks like underneath the engine is this goes right in here. Okay, and it bolts right to this piece of chromoly plate of your engine mount, and it'll go just like that. Okay, so once that's there and you put your cowling on, your cowling is underneath here, and with all the stuff under it helps seal it. So when you are fitting this on, it's a two-part thing. One, you have to have your cowling on to make sure this is going to fit properly. Then you have to have this on to make sure it's going to fit properly. Now, we did find that this was a little big on this edge, and we had to rebend it to fit our cowling, but that's fine. You know, no harm in that. So that's what you need to do before you can, you know, justify putting this on and say, yeah, this is where it needs to go. Make sure that you've gone ahead and fitted this all on, and that it doesn't interfere with this. Once the 620 series is put in place, we're ready to go ahead and start our fiberglassing of the nose gear. Now we start by making sure this is sanded down to where we want it real nice, and then we'll take it off and we'll go ahead and we'll mix up some Bondo and put in here, and the Bondo is strictly going to act as an adhesive. I'll also have put a mark here, so when I put this on, I can use that mark to center this fairing. So it's time to mix up some Bondo. So we've mixed the Bondo up, and we've got the groove filled with Bondo right now. I need to bring some down further. Like I said, the Bondo is acting strictly as an adhesive. And so now with the Bondo in the seam here, we're going to put the fairing back in place, squeezing it up, and just like before, how we held it on before is with a good old-fashioned wire tie. Okay, then we'll get underneath here and make sure our alignment marks are lined up. Remember, you're going to fiberglass on the top of this little wooden notch here, so you need to leave some space between the wood and your 620 here. And then you want to go ahead and push it up, seat it good and tight, line it all up, then get your putty knife and take all the excess off so it doesn't interfere when we go to fiberglass. And if you got a little excess, you can just fill it in here. For those of you that have never mixed Bondo, it's basically just a gray putty, and you add a little red cream to it, and you mix it until the gray goes away, and it's sort of a grayish red cream. It does not stay flexible long. You only have a matter of minutes to work with, and it's starting to harden on me right now. So I'm going to stop playing with it, get all the excess off.
Check my alignment. All right. So we'll let the Bondo cure now, and once the Bondo is cured, and it'll take maybe 20 or 30 minutes, or you can let it sit overnight, but 20 or 30 minutes, this is going to be hard. Then we're ready to start wrapping it with the fiberglass cloth. To do that, however, we're going to have to jack the plane up, take the landing gear off, take the wheel off, take the landing gear completely off the engine mount. Now you can use the connection on the top of the engine or the engine mount to lift it up. I wouldn't leave it suspended like that. We're going to go ahead and put a sawhorse or something underneath the engine mount and the front of the fuselage here to support this while we've got this off. So for right now, we're just letting this cure, and then we'll be ready to fiberglass. We start by mixing our resin up real well. Now, whether it be polyester or epoxy resin, the trick is to mix it real well. And we're using the epoxy resin here. The epoxy resin gives you a little more time to work with, and it also gives a little more flexibility. Now, we've got our gear clamped in a vise here and stretched out. We've also wrapped black electrical tape in the areas where we don't want resin to stick, such as the bearing point up the top and down at the bottom. And this will just help us in cleaning up later on. Now, we've wrapped our cloth around the leg already and measured it, and then we've unrolled it and put it in a little roll. And we're going to start by impregnating this roll of 2-inch fiberglass tape. Now, if it's a hot day and you're using polyester resin, which cures faster, you may want to go ahead and do this in 2 or 3 pieces to give yourself plenty of time to work. But since we're using the epoxy resin, we'll have plenty of time to do the whole roll. So we're going to do just a foot or 2 at a time and then roll it up until the whole roll here has been impregnated with the epoxy resin. Once we've got the entire roll done, we're ready to start. Now, haven't been too generous with the resin. It doesn't take a whole lot of resin, and it'll start squeezing out here when we start wrapping this around. Now, we're going to start at the top, and where the notch is at the top, we're going to just fiberglass right over that. We'll trim that all out later after the epoxy is hardened. So we're going to start. This is 2-inch tape, and we're going to put about a 1-inch overlap on each wrap. So by the time we get down to the bottom, we'll actually have 2 layers of cloth all the way around. And you want to pull it nice and tight, but not too tight, because you can actually stretch your tape and you'll end up with a 1-inch tape instead of a 2-inch tape. And that's not what you want. And you can see the excess starting to drip off already, and we did not put that much resin on this cloth. You want to work your way on down. Now, the trick is to keep your wraps as even as possible and get a nice and tight at the top, but again, not pulling too hard as to stretch the tape out. Now, remember, the plane has been jacked up to get the gear off, and it's on a sawhorse now. It's not being suspended just by a cable. Now, this is the 3rd landing gear we've done, and we've done it both on the plane and off the plane like this. And believe me, off the plane is much easier. It's a much easier work area, and you tend not to hit your head as often on the engine. Now, when you're doing this, you want to make sure you don't put any wrinkles in the cloth. So if you need to, back up and redo it in areas. Now, once we've gotten down to the end, this end part here is rather difficult to do. So what we've done is ended our first wrap, and this area in here we're going to use another piece. Where our first piece stopped right here, and we got 2 other pieces and started from the bottom and worked up. And from time to time you'll get little strings and you just snip them up smooth them down. Now, what you want to do is be careful. You want to smooth this all down now, get any wrinkles or air pockets out of it. You can see the resin dripping from the bottom, but you got to be careful that you got a nice tight wrap. You don't want to be loosening it up by playing with it. So we're just going to smooth it down the best we can, get the excess that's dripped on the lower end picked up, so we don't have to sand that off later. Now, if you had peel ply, you could wrap this with peel ply, which would bring more of the resin out of the cloth and give you a smoother surface, and then you can sand it off. With only 2 wraps, I wouldn't advise that because you're going to sand most of what you got on off. We're going to, after we're done with this, just go ahead and coat this with microballoon and resin and sand that off for our final finish. Now, if you want to peel ply, you could probably put 3 layers on it and go ahead and sand 1 layer off with the peel ply. So from here, we're just going to let this cure, and then we'll be ready to go ahead and put the microballoon and sand it off, and our gear leg will be done. And once all the work's done on the gear leg, it's put back on. You can see the back part's all fiberglassed on now. The white areas is where I filled with microballoon rather than sanding the fiberglass cloth off. You can see our little area up in top here. Now again, this is so the cowling is here, the bottom of the cowling, so when it takes off it can drop down to clear the spinner. And you can see this a little bit better here. And it's just a little notch right in here. And this is all done and ready to go. And from here we're going to go ahead and start on the final part of finishing the bottom of the cowling, which is the little air scoop that goes between here and the cowling. Now what you're looking at here is the inside of the bottom part of the cowling. Here again is the hole where your landing gear goes in. Then you've got your area for your air scoop. Now we've taken and bondoed that piece of construction foam, and you can see the bondo along here, and that was just to hold it in place. And then we've carved this out. Now how we did that was actually put the cowling on. Now this edge here should come within about 1/4 of an inch of your air scoop on your carburetor. Once we did that, we just drilled a hole down through the center of this with a drill bit, and it's very soft. It works real easy. And we started shaping with a file to match the contour of the outside of the air scoop with the contour of the inside of the carb air box. And we can lean it over here, and you can see that the hole goes straight on through. And now we're ready to fiberglass into that. Now what we'll actually do is take some fiberglass cloth and fiberglass inside of here, right to the outside of the air scoop. And we'll put 3 layers all the way around. And we're going to use 2-inch tape because it's kind of a funny contour. And if you try and use one piece, you may have some problems. So we're just going to use pieces of tape and put 3 layers all the way around. Now with the cowling, the air scoop pointing up, and you can still see some of the pink of the construction foam, I'm just taking little pieces of tape, and like I said, this is a 2-inch fiberglass tape, and just setting down in there, bringing it up on this lip here real good, because that's what it's going to stick to. And you want to make the first layer a little on the wet side so it'll stick to the construction foam. And we're just going to go all the way around. Putting these down in there. Now the purpose of this is to give you almost like a ram air effect when you, for your carburetor. Okay, so we're going to work our way right on around and put 3 layers of this all the way around. You may find on the outer edges that the epoxy and the fiberglass don't want to stick to that little 1/2 inch lip that you've got there. So an easy solution is, once you've got everything in place and smoothed out, before it can peel back up, go ahead and take some masking tape and just masking tape it down. Once the resin is cured, the masking tape will peel right off. If not, you've got some sanding to do anyway, so you can sand it off. And once we chip away all the construction foam, there's our little channel all done, and we've trimmed it off. Now you want to get it about 1/4 of an inch. This edge here should be about 1/4 of an inch from your air box. Any closer and you're probably going to have trouble getting it on. A little further back sometimes makes it easier, but you can see it's nice and rigid. The outside will be sanded down and filled to make it nice and smooth. What this all matches up to, like I said, is the carb air box. Now, after you've done all your trimming, then you want to go ahead and put your rubber seal on. Now, this seal is what closes up that 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch gap between your carb air box and that little chute. You want to do just like I said in the instructions, start in the center of the seal up top here and just sort of bend it right on around. A good way to start out is to actually cleco it up top here with maybe just one cleco, bend it around and duct tape it on. Then go ahead and put your cowling on, and you can see if it's too tight, too loose, and you can adjust it with the duct tape. Once you've got it duct taped where you want it, then you go ahead with your pop rivets and pop rivet it on in place. With this, your carb air box and the lower part of your cowling's all done. The 2-piece wheel pans go together basically just like the nose wheel fairing. You start with your 2 halves, and they've come roughly trimmed. So what you're going to want to do is fit the 2 halves together, and you're going to want to sand this edge off to meet up with this edge. And you may even need to take a file to file in here to straighten this edge out. Once you've got them fitted nice, you go ahead and drill a couple holes in cleco to hold them together. Okay, that's the first part. Next, you have to go over to your wheel. On the wheel, we need to mount our U606. Now, this is mounted to all the things that hold the brake caliper on. There's 3 bolts that hold this on, and there's a little shim made out of tubing that's behind this, and that's to hold the U606 away from the brake caliper so it doesn't rub. So this is done really just according to the instructions and the plans, and nothing real fancy. Make sure it doesn't interfere with your brake caliper. Your brake caliper has to move freely back and forth as it well in operation, and make sure it doesn't interfere with your brake lines. Once this is installed, the next thing we have to do is get the plane in the right position. The position of the plane now is important. Now let me explain what we're trying to accomplish. A couple things. One, we're trying to get the wheel pans so when the plane is in flight, basically the back of the wheel pan is straight up and down. We want the wheel pan in a nice flight attitude. Okay, we don't want it like this, which will cause drag, or this. Now, thinking about that, there's another thing you got to take into consideration, especially on a 6A, that when your wheel pan is installed and you push the tail completely down to the ground, the wheel pan should not drag the ground. So you're going to have to find a happy medium between getting this in a nice flight attitude when the airplane is level and when the airplane's tail is touching the ground, that the wheel pan does not drag. Now, how do we do this? Well, basically we start by putting the same amount of air in each tire, and this is covered in the instructions. So we equalize the pressure in the tires. We then level the airplane. Now, to do this, we had to jack the plane up and actually put 2 pieces of 2x4 under the main tires, and that lifted the mains up enough that it leveled the longeron real good. Then we slid the wheel pan on and got a general placement of it, saying, yeah, right here it's in a nice flight attitude. Then we took those boards out, pushed the tail completely to the ground, and saw if the wheel pan scraped the ground.
If it did, we adjusted it up a little bit so it didn't scrape the ground. And you may say, well, we'll never get the tail that low, but don't bet on it. Okay? So that's what we're trying to do. Once we've figured that out, in the instructions they say that there's a place on the wheel pan to drill a hole. Now, I've had a couple other builders complain that their tires won't fit in the wheel pan, and that's only because they've drilled this hole, okay, in the wrong place. They've drilled it too high, which brought the wheel pan down onto the tire. So what we like to do is we actually slid the wheel pan on. Now, no holes were drilled yet. Then we took a piece of wood, and we just took a little piece of wood, it's a 1/2 inch thick, and we put under the wheel fairing on top of the tire. Then we measured from the axle nut hole down to the floor, and then we measured from the floor back up on our wheel pan, and we decided that's where we wanted that hole. That gave us about a 1/2 inch clearance for our tire inside the wheel pan. From there, we slid the wheel pan up until it contacted the axle. With some very careful measuring and trimming, we trimmed enough of just the back of this part of the wheel pan that we could then slide the wheel pan completely up onto it. Now, what we've got is the splice mark in the wheel pan is on the center line of the tire, and that's what we use for our centering. Now remember, these wheel pans are right and left. One side is very flat, the other side has a round bulge. The flat side goes on the outside because the round bulge is to allow for the brake system. We then trim this little by little until we could slide this up, and we've got it in position. We've got our hole drilled that we could put our bolt through. Let me get the bolt. Okay. We just use a bolt. Eventually it'll be a screw with a countersunk washer to make it look real nice. Then we did a little more trimming, and you want to be careful not to trim too much. You want to keep a nice fit in back here. From there, on the inside of the airplane, we hung some strings right on the center line. We actually used the splice plate of the two pieces of skin. We hung these strings. From the strings, we measured from the strings to that line on the wheel pan, and we did it forward and we did it aft. Okay, that was to get our placement right and left, because the wheel pan can move back and forth this way. Once we've got that placement where we wanted it, we clamped it with a Cleco side grip, took our blocks of wood out, went to the back of the airplane, and pushed the tail down. Now, it's one of those two-piece people jobs. One person's got to hold it down while the other person looks and says, yeah, you're not scraping, you're good. Once we're satisfied with that, we're satisfied that it's where we want, we go ahead and drill the two holes that hold the rear part of the wheel pan to our U606. And we get that drilled on. Let me pop a couple Clecos in here. Okay, so once that's on, and this may not fit on right away, I'll sort of warn you right now, because the hole in the bottom is not trimmed open all the way. So you may go to push it on and you say it won't go on. Well, feel back in here and make sure you've got adequate clearance for your tire. And I like to get my fingers between the fairing and the tire. If I can get my fingers in all the way around, I know I've got clearance. Once this is on, the next thing we need to do is then fit our nose piece on. Now, what we'll probably end up doing is just cutting a small notch right here that'll fit around the axle. It won't take much. The biggest thing is cutting this opening to get it to fit. So then we work and we get it cut.
and we get it to where it'll fit right on. And then we've got our holes that we originally drilled to fit our halves together. And there's our two-piece wheel pan all put together. Now, a couple things you're going to find is, one, the back half of the wheel pan does not meet with the front half, especially right here in the center. It's usually lower and it's a little flatter, and this is a little rounder, just like with the nose wheel fairing. What we'll do is sand an area of this down back in here, fill micro balloon across it, sand it off together with the front half, and you'll get a perfect fit. But basically, that's the placement of your two-piece wheel pans. Next, we want to make our main gear fairings. Now, the drawing 58 in your plans shows the main gear fairings two size. They also show how they'll go installed on the main gear right here. And they show that in the center hereabouts there's a flex point, so that when the gear flex, so can the fairings. Now, I've talked to people who have decided to build these in one piece rather than two, and they ended up building a second pair because the first landing they did and the gear flexed, it crinkled them all up. So we do it the easy way. We start with our aluminum, and we start with some pieces of hinge, and we actually cut the hinge right as they have it on the plans. And we've already cut them, and right to the size that they have on the plans. And we go ahead and we cut all our hinges like that. Okay. Next, we take our skin and we'll actually measure from the drawings two sides, from point to point. And we've already marked this one right here, and you'll see this will get cut right here. So we're going to do it just right off the plan, since the plans are to scale. So once we've got this line drawn on the skin all the way around, the next thing is to cut this. Now that the two halves are cut, remember that the top part is going to overlap the bottom part. Okay, and that overlap is on here 3/4 of an inch. And what we want to do is go ahead and mark that 3/4 of an inch overlap, put the pieces together, get them on a nice straight edge. Now you'll find that now there is a little bit of an overlap. The top skin is a little bit bigger than the bottom one, and it's about 1/8 of an inch, but you're going to have to look at that and trim off this back edge of the top one so they match up again. Now that we've got the top half trimmed so that when it overlaps, the edges meet here now, and we got a nice... You want to go ahead and clean these up, especially the overlap cuts, so you don't scratch up your aluminum. Clean this all up. Then we actually just meet it right back down to the plans. Now, on the plans they show a cutout for your axle, and you may want to wait to do that, because you may, if you're doing both of these at the same time, you may end up cutting this out and making yourself two right-hand sides or two left-hand sides. So I wait until I actually fit this on before I do any of this trimming here and cut the axle hole out. But what I can do right now is actually set the piece down here and say, okay, here's this piece, and let's find the... And here's that piece of hinge that goes there, and transfer the marks, and you'll notice that the hinge doesn't go right on the edge, it goes back a little bit. But I'll transfer all my measurements that are here onto my aluminum, put my hinges right where they're supposed to be on the one side, and drill and cleco them together. Once one side is done, I'll go ahead and turn it over,
Do the other side, clamping it with some Cleco side grips and squeezing it together to make sure the hinges line up. Once I'm sure that the hinges are lined up, I'll go ahead and do that. Now, looking on the plans, you'll see that right here on the edge there's no rivet here, and that's deliberate because this skin here will slide under that piece of hinge. Okay, same thing up in here. There's a rivet here, but there's no hinge here. That's because this piece, this top piece of skin, will overlap here. And when you put these together with your hinge pin, that's what gives you your movement. Once your pieces are together, the hinge pin is back here. Okay, that's what gives you your flex. You flex on that hinge pin. It'll allow it to flex here on the hinge pin. So from here, we basically just drill and Cleco everything together just like it is in the plans. Now once the gear fairings are all riveted up, this is what they look like, the bottom part, and the hinge is on the inside. And then you've got your top part, and like I said, they fit together, the top part overlapping the bottom part, and then the hinge pin that goes up through there is what gives it its flex. Now from here we're ready to fit them to the gear. Now we start by fitting just the bottom half, and what we'd like to do is go ahead and put our wheel fairing on. I'm just going to set it on here roughly. Then we take the gear fairing and we'll put it on here, and we'll get it in position, and we'll slide a pin up through there, and we'll trim it until it fits real nice and close to the wheel pan. Okay, so now how we get our alignment, there's an alignment here like this. You actually stretch a string again. You'll drop two plumb lines in the center of the airplane, stretch the string across, and you'll measure from the front of here out and from the back out, and that gets your alignment. Now once you've got the bottom part trimmed and fitting real nice here, then it's time to do the top part. Now also notice on the bottom where our brake line comes down, we've wrapped some of that plastic tubing around it to protect it. And it comes all the way down. You can see it down in here. And that's to protect the brake line from the wheel pan and from the gear fairing. Now up at the top of the gear, we've done the same thing. Right here, we've wrapped some of this plastic tube around it. Right in here, where the brake line will come down into the gear fairing. We've also used some black electrical tape to hold our brake line to stop any vibration. Now we take our top part and we'll fit it so it fits real nice up against the fuselage. And again, first you'll get it so it fits, and it's about 3 or 4 inches long, so you don't have to worry about trimming off too much. We'll get a rough fit, then we'll actually go ahead and mount the bottom part on. And let me get it started here. And slide it down into position. We'll go ahead and mount our top part on. At the top of the gear fairing, you want to go ahead and make a notch in the fairing to allow your brake line to come out. Okay, and again, we've got the plastic on there to protect it. Now, where the pin comes up through the gear fairing, it'll come all the way up, and the pin will contact the bottom of the fuselage. Now once you've got your fairing straight, you want to go ahead and drill a hole into the bottom of the fuselage to allow that pin to go up into it. That'll help hold the bottom of, or hold the top of the fairing in position. Now it'll still move a little bit, but if you make a fiberglass fairing now to fair in here, that'll hold that the rest of the way. Some people have even take and pop rivet a small piece of aluminum right here to hold the front, but if you make a nice fiberglass fairing, it's not going to go anywhere. Now, down at the bottom of the fairing, where the pin comes out, we've taken the pin right here and bent it, and we've bent it so it comes up and touches the axle. Okay, how we hold that is we'll then take a pipe clamp, or not a pipe clamp, but a hose clamp, and let me get it started here. And the hose clamp just wraps right around the axle, right around that pin. Just like that. And now the bottom part of the fairing's held in place, and your wheel fairing and gear fairing are now all nice and mated together. We can put the, you can see when you put your gear fairing on, you got a nice joint there. Now you can either make a fiberglass cuff to fit in here, or we're actually going to try and take, since we've got a nice fit, just glue some rubber around the gear fairing that'll contact the wheel fairing and close this all up. Next we put the spinner on. Now the spinner is what covers up this ugly part of the prop, and the spinner comes sort of generic depending on your prop. So you got to do a little cutting and fitting. Of course you got to have your prop on. You've got your rear spinner plate on and your forward spinner plate on. And then you use your spinner. Now your spinner that comes from VANS actually it's very nice. There's a couple things you have to do. You have to fit it so that the plates contact the spinner. You don't want a big gap between the spinner and one of the spinner plates. We found with the constant speed prop, however, that there wasn't any problem at all. It fit real nice. But this is going to depend on what prop you have. So one thing you may have to do is put some fiberglass or some Bondo on the inside of your spinner and push it on to take up any gap that may be on your spinner plate. So what we're going to show you, we're assuming that you didn't have to do that and it all fit properly. With the spinner plates in place and the prop on, the first thing we needed to do was make a template. Now all the template is just showing the area that needs to be cut out around the prop. Just a piece of cardboard, and it took a couple to get right. Now with a constant speed prop, the prop turns, so what you also have to do is up on the prop clamp two boards, one on each side of the prop with a couple clamps, and you can turn your prop very slowly and make sure you have clearance inside of this hole. Once you've got your cutout to the shape you like it, then you go to your spinner. Now on the spinner, what you want to do, the first thing is have two opposing marks, and it was real simple. What we did was measure the circumference of the spinner with a tape, divided it in half, and then we made a mark, measured that far, and then we made sure that that mark was equal distance between marks, and you just sort of play with it until you get your equal distance between marks. Once you've done that, you simply just transfer your cutout onto your spinner, okay, and you cut your holes out. Now this can be done with a pair of snips. This is not very thick fiberglass. However, you want to be careful because you're going to need part of this cutout, okay, and part of it will look like this where it came out, and it was just, you know, just came out of the hole, and we just cut it out with a pair of snips. Once you've got your hole cut out, and you can cut it out rough and touch it up later, you go ahead and put your spinner on and check it for fit. Now you want to push it all the way back until it's got a nice contact on this rear plate. Then up at the front plate you can actually push on it and see if it's contacting the front plate. If it's not contacting the front plate, that's where you're going to have to put a little fiberglass on the inside and push it on so it takes up that gap. Now once you've got your spinner in position, like this, you need to go ahead and clamp it on. The next thing you want to do is make sure that the nose of the spinner, the very point, is straight. If it's not straight, as this thing spins, it's going to do this. And you don't want that. You want this thing nice and straight. There's an awful lot of centrifugal forces going on with this. So there's a couple ways to do this. One, you can actually just take a ladder or a board or something and put right in front of here with a nail or something pointing right at the spinner. Take the top plugs out of your engine, and you can turn the engine over by hand. Now, we found turning it over by hand, you tend to push the plane a little bit, so that was hard to do sometimes. But you can turn it slowly and see if the point of the spinner moves up and down. The other thing you can do is actually take a car battery or an aircraft battery with a set of jumper cables, hook them to your starter, and turn the thing over with it clamped in place. Make sure that everything's clear of the prop so you don't hit anything, but turn it over and check for any wobble in the spinner. If there's some, then you can adjust it. You can move the spinner one way or the other until you get it where it's dead center, where this point doesn't move. Once you've got that, it's an easy matter to go ahead, per the instructions, and drill your holes. I think they call for 14 holes on the back and 6 holes in the front. Now, to find these front ones, you just simply measure from the back plate to the front plate and transfer those measurements over. Once you've got this on, then there's only one thing left to do, and that's to fill this hole that's on the top side here, right in here. Now, to do that, you take part of that fiberglass that you had originally cut out, and you cut and fit that in there until it seals that up. So you cut that little piece out and you get it all nice and fitted in there. Then what you want to do is take some aluminum, and you can see I put a little doubler plate on here, and on the doubler plate is also a nut plate, and you'll put a screw through the spinner into that nut plate, and then through the little piece of fiberglass into the back spinner plate, which has nut plates in it also, and that's what holds that in, and that's what seals that. With your fixed pitch prop, you can get a real nice seal in here. As you can see, there's a pretty good gap around here. That's because the constant speed prop, the prop moves. So once you've done that, your spinner's in place. It'll take some trimming on this back edge here, and you can just mark that with a pencil, take it off, and trim it close, and then sand it down the rest of the way. But that's about it for the spinner. It's a very simple process once you've seen what it's supposed to look like. The big trick is templates. Don't cut anything until you've got a template that shows you exactly where you want the holes. Make sure you've got opposing marks so that when you put your templates in position, they're where you want. And if you've got a fixed pitch prop, you can cut your hole a little small, fit it on, and then actually sand it and get it to where you want it if you're a little uneasy. So don't cut the holes too big at first. From here, about the only thing left to do was a couple little fairings, and the one we'll show you now is the tail cone fairing. Probably the worst fairing to get to fit sometimes is this vertical stabilizer fairing. Now, as it comes from VANS, it's usually pretty good. Now, this one's not quite done yet, but it fit on real well. We were real pleased right from the factory. We'll just do a little sanding on this, it looks like, and all we'll have to do is put some rib nuts in here, along in here, just to hold this in place, and it'll be done. Some people have to sand out the nose of this. It's a little too thick. And some people have to cut this part in here off, but this just takes a little fitting. If it doesn't fit well, and I've talked to some builders who've had problems with theirs, particularly ones that had older kits, these edges tend to curl up, and what they've had to do is just go ahead and cut about an inch off of this edge and an inch off of this edge and fiberglass that inch back on. Now, underneath here, you're going to need another fairing, and that's just going to take up this little bit of a gap that's between the fuselage and your stabilizer. And there's a little gap, and there's a bigger gap up in here. What we'll do on that is actually just take some cardboard and make a nice template, so I get exact this exact curve, transfer that over onto some 025 aluminum, cut a little fairing that'll go under here, it'll go under the fiberglass fairing here and go under the fiberglass fairing and back. Some people have actually drilled and tapped the longeron. I'll probably just drill and pop rivet that fairing on, since it won't need to come off for any inspection. The last fairing on here is where your rudder cables come out. And the rudder cables come out of the fuselage here. And we make a little aluminum fairing. You can get them from us, or you can get them from Avery Enterprises. And it comes rough trim. There's a lot of aluminum around it that you can trim yourself. But this just fits right over that cable. And when you rivet it on, we'll Cleco it on here for you. It'll look something like that. And it just makes a nice transition for that cable. We sell these in a set of 3. You got one for each rudder cable, and the third one is for your trim tab cable where it comes out of the elevator. Well, Becky and I hope you've enjoyed the tape. We hope you've gotten all the information you needed out of it to do your finishing kit and to do it the way you wanted. Now the fun starts for us, and for you also if you're in the same place, and that's doing the systems. The oil systems, the electrical systems, fuel systems. And that'll all be covered on our next tape, the systems tape. So for now, we'll leave you, and hopefully someday we'll see you at an air show.